Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with a short demo and discussion about the game-changing capability of the Siebel Open Integration API. Obviously, since this is a video about Oracle Intelligent Advisor, the focus will be how we can use this API to help us build what is called an entity collect extension. Let's first of all start off with what it is we're going to try and do. So here in Siebel, we have a bunch of accounts, a list applet, which I'm sure you recognize. And our goal will be to leverage the data and the metadata of a standard list applet, such as this one, and reproduce this layout quickly using the new Siebel Open Integration API. Now, we could have done that before the Open Integration API existed, but it would have required a lot of heavy lifting because we would essentially have to be calling multiple APIs. We would have to use the repository REST API to go and get the definition of the applet, and we would have to use the business object API, as it's called, to go and get the business data regarding accounts, and probably would have had to do some extra work as well behind the scenes. So the game-changing nature of the Siebel Open Integration API, especially the Applet API, which is what we're looking at in a moment, is that essentially a lot of the hard work is packaged into one single call, and certain things are made much easier than they would have been before. So that's the background from a Siebel perspective. From an Oracle Intelligent Advisor, or indeed, for that matter, an Oracle Policy Modeling perspective, what we're going to try and do is we're going to use an entity collect to display the data, make it editable, essentially replicate the user experience of an applet in Oracle Policy Modeling in this case. So we're going to have on our side an object called the account, an entity called the account, and you will see that that entity has been created in Oracle Policy Modeling with representative attributes that logically, technically, and in business terms map to those standard fields that you saw in the Siebel applet. Frankly, you could have avoided all of this and done it all from scratch, but the nice part about this is that the representative data is visible inside Oracle Policy Modeling. So if we wanted to do calculations on those entity instances, it's as if they came from Oracle Policy Modeling. This is not some sort of thin layer sitting on top of the interview with just JavaScript. This is actually integrating them into the, we'll call it the business layer of Oracle Policy Modeling. It requires, therefore, us to have at least one screen in our interview, and that screen, as you can see, is going to simply display the entity in entity collect style, and I've displayed the relevant attributes which map to the fields. For simplicity's sake, I've put it into tabular mode, not because I'm going to render it this way, but because it will help you see the connection between what I've done here and what you see in the final demonstration. The order of the columns here is not important. The presence of the columns is important because Oracle Policy Modeling wants to know what it is that you're going to display in order to be able to map it back to the relevant attributes in the entity. Finally, for those of you who are not familiar with it, if you want to have a custom rendering of an entity collect, the first thing you need to decide of is how are you going to trigger that? And the commonest way is to add what's known as a custom property to the control, in this case the entity collect control. This can be anything you like, banana, banana, banana. This doesn't have to be name. The point is that in your JavaScript, you're going to look for that and trigger your code when it is present. So now let's take a brief look at what's going on behind the scenes in Oracle Policy Modeling in our custom extension. All extensions of any kind in Oracle Policy Modeling all start with a wrapper that looks like this. For those of you who come from the Siebel Open UI framework, you'll recognize this as being similar to the idea of creating a unique identifier for your extension and plugging it into the Siebel namespace. Here, we're simply declaring that we have an extension. The extension type is critical because that obviously allows you access to underlying API methods and functions. Just in the same way as when you create a PR in Siebel Open UI, that gives you access to a bunch of stuff through the API. And if you try and do the same kind of thing when you're building a PM, you'll get all sorts of issues because the class will be different and the method won't be available and so on. Just like the Siebel Open UI API, we also have certain objects that are available to us. So these are passed natively into our custom entity collect. We have access to the interview object, which represents, if you like, the entire interview from end to end with all of its different screens. And obviously we have access to the control. The control is the thing we're trying to display, in our case, the custom entity collect. So we'll be able to use methods from the control, like add new row, removing a row, which will allow us to build our custom entity collect. You can see that the custom property that I used a minute ago is really the gatekeeper to this. So if this is another entity collect that I'm not interested in, then none of my code will fire. So if we do have the right property in place and we are looking at the right control, then we have a whole bunch of code that executes. We pass in the control and interview because we're going to need them. We're going to use, for this simple example, we're going to use JS Grid, a really lightweight version. It's not JQ Grid, it's really lightweight. And I do want to state something for the record, is that this is a demo that is using a Mozilla fetch, because for various reasons, the interview fetch, which you'll be familiar with if you're an Oracle Intelligent Advisor person, is not working on this particular URL at the moment because of certificate issues. So I'm getting a workaround and I'm using a Mozilla fetch, a traditional JavaScript fetch. None of this data, such as the URL, the password, and all that, would ever normally be visible inside the JavaScript which you provide for your custom entity extension. For the purposes of my demo, I've had to put it in to be able to do this as a local run project. Now, if we scroll down, you'll start to see features which, if you're an Oracle Intelligent Advisor person, start to look a little more familiar. Whereas Open UI has a lifecycle which is fairly, in terms of PRs at least, is fairly rich. You have an init event, you have a show UI event, you have a bind events, bind data, an end life. With Oracle Intelligent Advisor, with these extensions, we have a much smaller set of events, or keys as we call them. So the only one that I'm showing you here is the mount event, which is kind of the init plus show UI plus potentially build plus potentially bind data and bind events. It's kind of all in one where we do all of our basic stuff. So you can see that we've set up some things like next button and previous button. You'll see that we do some appending, so we actually stick some HTML on the page. We build a grid and a wrapper and a status row. All of that is just appended to the element. So the EL that you can see there is the root element of our custom control. So everything you do is going to be pumped into the L so that it displays in the right place in the interview. And you'll see that we have a bunch of functions such as load Siebel page, which use available parameters such as page size, such as record count, and then we extract the items out of there. And for example, you can see we were doing a test here. We can simply put that in the dialog to show you what the response is from the JSON. But we're much more interested in build Siebel grid, which, as it sounds, is actually going to build a nice applet style grid. The applet style grid is going to render based on the UI metadata available to us. So the response from the Open Integration API will include a node called UI metadata. and we can then build our user experience based on that UI metadata. We're going to rotate or loop through the different elements in the UI metadata, and then we're going to build an array of columns, and we're going to add extra synthetic columns, such as a button to create a new order. And if someone clicks on it, we're going to go and call another Open Integration API REST URL. And then we are going to provide features such as if somebody needs to, if you've updated something, we need to synchronize the visible data on the rows. But here is really what matters. This is the entire code used to render the grid. So it's using JS Grid, and it's using the data that we've concocted from the items in the REST response to the Open Integration API, and we're using the response in the UI metadata to build the columns. That's it. So with one UI, with one call to the Open Integration Applet API, we are able to get the data and the columns and build a grid. Everything else, if you like, is a little bit extra. You'll recall from the video, and if you haven't already taken the Siebel Hub training on the new features of the Open Integration API, I strongly recommend it, that the OpenUI metadata include things like the type. So is it a J checkbox? Is it a J text checkbox? So we're going to use those to render our own grid. So these are all kind of helper functions to make sure that our grid looks the way it should do. Now, of course, where you have list of values, as you already know, the list of values are also visible in the output. So we're going to build a list of values, essentially a drop-down when a list of values is present. We're going to check to see whether things are editable, of course, and if a field such as parent account name is present, and in this case you can see I've hard-coded it for the demo, we're going to be able to go and get the pick values so that the user can see the pick applet, or essentially our rendering of the pick list or the pick applet, and select a new parent account. And then we're going to fiddle around with the displays. We're going to render the update of Siebel nice and generic so that we can call a function to update a specific field, and if we don't get a response, we'll know that there's been an issue, or if we're missing the ID, it means the user has failed to select a row, that sort of thing. And you can see that in the case of a Siebel field update, we're calling a put, and we're going to put the correct field value in. And we're going to display a little message to tell you whether that's happened or not. Finally, we're going to use the ability of the Open Integration API for applets to call available methods. So there's an applet method on this applet called new order, and we're going to push a call to new order and hopefully create an order for this account. So let's go ahead and run this as a local demo. So I'm just going to open up the interview in my default browser with Control F5, and you can see that we're displaying a standard page, and you can see that we have 10 rows, and you can see the column headers that should look very familiar, which came from the metadata provided by the Siebel Open Integration Applet API. We also have, where appropriate, list of values. So a list of value. We also have a pick list, and where appropriate, we have exposed a method from the applet, such as the new order method. So we can see we created a new order. And if I open my Siebel application and head to all accounts and make a query for the relevant row ID, drill down on the account and go looking for the orders, and I create another order and refresh this, you'll see there's another record. The time zone of the server is slightly different to the time zone of my own PC, which is why the order date and time is a little strange. But you can see that each time I click the new order button, the relevant method is executed. If I move to the next page, you'll see that as far as Oracle Policy Modeling, or indeed Oracle Intelligent Advisor, is concerned, it's just entity data. So although it came from Siebel, it's as if the end user had gone in and collected the data manually, which means that this data is truly registered as part of the Oracle Intelligent Advisor, or the Oracle Policy Modeling interview session contains this data. So it's not a thin layer on top just displaying stuff. This is now actually part of the interview. And that concludes my short demonstration about how incredibly easy it is now with the Siebel Open Integration API to use get, put, post to, for example, interact with the Applet API and draw both the data and the metadata necessary for creating custom entity collects in Oracle Policy Modeling. Those of you who've been around for a while will know that Oracle Policy Modeling entity collects are not something previously that you would have thought about doing unless you were really being coerced into doing it. They were hard work because you had to build everything yourself from multiple sources, metadata, data, layout, and so on. Now we have essentially a very simple API which enables us to do that kind of work very much more rapidly, and that is a game changer. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you again next time.